Kia ora koutou, Markie here with this shaky camera, all content, no style. So, I'm in my usual impulsive, impetuous way. I'm making this video when I should be doing other things. I should be eating really because I'm starving hungry. But I just had it in my mind to do. So, even though I'm not going to release this for a little while, I wanted to do this now. Okay, so it's off the cuff. I haven't prepared for this one, so I'm hoping that I get all my facts straight, facts right. I'm not going to go into great depth. I'm going to give more of a flavour and an overview, because that's what demystification is all about, really. Great depth can be found elsewhere. You know, academics can give you great depth. What I like to do is give you an overview and a balanced view as well, so that you can kind of make it your mind. I do share my opinions as well. I usually say if it's my opinion as opposed to something that's believed to be fact. And what I want to talk about is the Treaty of Waitangi. Okay, nothing to do with Tangi. This is a Maori word, and there are quite a few Maori words that are pronounced T-A-N, T-A-N-G-I. And you don't pronounce them tangi, you pronounce them tungi. So a funeral is a tungi. But Waitangi is a place, okay, and it's also the name of a very momentous treaty that was made. Okay. And today is, if you're watching this, today will be, for the first time, if you're watching this when it first comes out, today is Waitangi Day, okay, which is a national holiday in New Zealand, or to use its proper name, Aotearoa, which is the proper Maori name for New Zealand. Okay, so I'm going to give you a history lesson. Hopefully it's not going to be like the ones at school. I used to have this history teacher that always used to look like he was falling asleep, and he just used to dictate to us. Dictate as in writing, not dictate as in kind of tyrant. And he would kind of always start the lessons with "Capitally the margin," and then he'd just tell us stuff, and we write it down. So yeah, won't be doing any of that. Okay, so New Zealand, as you probably know it, assuming most people that are watching this are probably going to be European or American or from elsewhere, because if you're from New Zealand, you probably know all about this stuff, so you don't need to watch the video. Okay, so New Zealand, a really fascinating place for lots of reasons, and I could get sidetracked here and go down lots of kind of tangents. Like, for example, there's a lot of endemic wildlife here, things that only exist here. So it was a very isolated place, and it wasn't inhabited. There are lots of different theories about this, and I don't know what to make of them. Some theories say that there were people here before the Maori arrived, and some people say that there weren't, and that the Maori were the first kind of people to inhabit these islands. And they are islands, not island. I mean, if there were people here before, and I'm open to that possibility, I don't have a strong view on this, it's just something I'd like to research into more. I don't think there was a vast population. I think it's probably quite a small population. I believe it was about 1100. So, not at the time of, if you're British, that's the kind of time of, Norman, castles, lots of castles being built, and early knights on horses, and that's the beginning of what we call the medieval period in Europe and the West. That's the time that the Maori people are believed to have come to New Zealand and settled, and they are Polynesian people. So they have a kinship with people from a long way. There's massive feats. It was one of the greatest feats of seamanship in history, considering that they came across in quite small ships over a vast stretch of ocean. So the Polynesian people, there are Polynesian people in Hawaii and a lot of different, mainly island nations. But they came a long, so people kind of often, kind of talk about, the Maori, the original Maori inhabitants of this island as kind of, like hairy barbarians, and but no, they were warlike. and they did some things that would make Iranti wince at a tea party if they discussed them in terms of what they did as part of war and things like that. But then think about the atrocities that that were perpetuated by the so-called civilized countries. So so they have a sophisticated art, sophisticated culture, sophisticated spirituality. So you're probably guessing, gathered already that I'm very pro Maori. So the other thing to remember is that it's not, people talk about Maori people, it was Maori peoples, because there were kind of different groups that settled the islands, not as one nation, but as a series of regional tribes. And quite a lot of regional tribes, and the tribes are known as iwi, and the iwi are divided into smaller subunits called hapu. So there were wars between the tribes on quite a regular basis. But like I said, I don't think that's any reason to kind of imply that they're any less they're the worst people, that they are worse people than the Westerners. I think the Westerners just were more sophisticated at killing people, really. So, okay, this is all relevant. Okay, Westerners started to come to New Zealand from different places. There were lots of French. There were people from Holland, which is why it's called New Zealand, because Zealand's a place in Holland. And lots of trading went on for the commodities that are available here, and the Maori tribes were very keen on that. So one of the things that happened was that they wanted muskets, and the Westerners supplied muskets for them in exchange for a number of things, including a very early kind of sex industry that kind of started. So what happened really was that New Zealand became a bit of a wild, kind of a wild west, really, a bit of a wild, lawless place where there was lots of prostitution going on. The individual chiefs of the different tribes were kind of in charge, but there were kind of areas that that where white people had settled, and they were kind of not really governed by anyone, really. It was all a bit loose around the edges. Now, at the time, the British Empire wasn't particularly wanting to expand, which is kind of interesting. I always think that they just want to grab everything all the time, but not exactly. And what had happened was there was a movement. A humanitarian movement that was challenging, some of the, rightfully so, challenging, the behaviours of the British Empire towards indigenous people. And our neighbour across the ditch, of course, Australia, the Aboriginal people there were and still are treated really badly. Okay, so I'm sure I'm going to get some Australians giving me grief for this, but I don't care. That is some Australians of European origin. Some terrible things were done, right up until, well, you can look into that, I'm not telling you anything that's not, been documented. So the British Empire, and I think they were a little bit stretched at that point. Not quite sure what was going on kind of economically or what have you. So they didn't really want to kind of, fully colonise New Zealand, but they didn't want anyone else to do it either. They didn't want the French to get in there, and that was looking quite likely. So they thought, we better do something. So what they proposed was a treaty, and this is the Treaty of Waitangi, okay? And this was, I'm terrible with dates. I think it was 1830, but it might have been 1829. So what they did was they made this proposal that all the resources would belong to Maori, so that the natural resources, the timber, the minerals, the fish in the sea, the land, would all belong to Maori people, and but they would also become members of the British Empire, and they would receive the benefit of justice and law and protection from the British Empire. Which sounds like quite a good deal, doesn't it? Really, particularly if things are becoming a kind of bit chaotic with lots of Westerners around that aren't being kind of governed really in any kind of effective way. So it all sounded really good. So this that happened in the North Island didn't apply to the South Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. That was just kind of snatched. The British just did the old thing of stick a flag in the ground and say it's ours. And I think part of the reason for that was that it was less populated. But I'm assuming that there are a lot of more complex reasons for that. So to get into that, you probably have to go a lot more deeply into this. So this treaty, so bear in mind, most of although many of the Maori people could speak English, only some of them could write English, or could read or write in English. So it's a written treaty, and it was kind of read out to most of the chiefs. Most of them gathered in a place called Waitangi, which is where it kind of started off. And then, so a lot of people signed it there, but it kind of travelled around the country. Not everybody came to Waitangi on that particular day and signed the treaty. So some of the iwi, the tribes, didn't sign it. They thought, probably quite wisely, probably quite prescient. They thought, I smell a rat here. So what I can't seem to get to the bottom of is how genuine this treaty was. There's one controversy, is that there were two different versions of it, which were kind of blamed on translation, and they had slightly different wording, which left some ambiguity. So some people think that the treaty was actually a really good thing, and other people think that it was flawed from the start and was a bit tricksy from the start. But again, that's getting into it much more deeply. So the other thing that was part of the treaty was that you could only sell land. Land could only be bought by the government. So individuals and companies and consortia couldn't buy up land because land was a big issue. Okay. Everybody that signed it got a free gift. They got a free pouch of tobacco. So there was a kind of quite a strong push to make this happen. And the majority of chiefs signed it, but certainly not all. Okay. So all sounds good, Sounds like a good deal. Sounds like something that's a lot more respectful to the indigenous population than what happened in other parts of what became the British Empire. But it didn't last very long, because it was only, I'm not sure. I can say I'm terrible on dates. I should have maybe checked dates before I spoke about this. But and what I might do is just put some of the dates in the description box below to clarify that. But not very long. Not long after the ink dried on the treaty, land was taken from Maori, and it was lots of dirty deeds were done, really. And when Maori protested, either peacefully, which many of them did, there's a whole movement, particularly in the area that I'm living in now, the whole movement towards peaceful, a bit like Gandhi, what did he call it, non-violent opposition. That wasn't the term, but it's something like that. And some did go to war, and it started what traditionally were known as the Maori Wars, which now, people are starting to say, no, we shouldn't call it the Maori Wars, because it's kind of like, saying it's their fault. It should be called the New Zealand Wars. So they should be called the New Zealand Wars. So they occurred afterwards and rumbled on for quite a long time with, atrocities and loss of life and all the things that war brings with it. Why did they go to war? Because people started snatching their land. People, the whole, the treaty went out the window, and people started to, individuals started to buy land, and sometimes, Maori were quite happy to do that. Some Maori were more pro-British or pro-Western than others. And in the wars, some of the Maori tribes fought on the side of the British Empire and colonists. But ultimately, the land was taken from them for the most part, and when they went to war, which was kind of, it's a good case for going to war when somebody's trying to kind of steal your land from you. That was then used against them, and the whole, they're these crazy savages, uneducated, heathen, subhuman, dark-skinned savages, and look what they've done. They've killed these people, and they've done this, and they've done that, and they've done. So everything that they did to defend themselves was kind of used against them. Sounds like an unhappy ending. Certainly a terrible injustice took place. But the story's not over, because the treaty is effectively, it's still legally binding today, and the government are very the government take it very seriously, as they should. And where land has been illegally taken from iwi, from the tribes, from Maori people, there has been a movement to give it back. And where that's not possible, to compensate people, financially or in different ways. So there's been lots of investigation into ownership of land and the history, and going back, and it's a very, it's tricky to make reparations, in the immediate term. If there's a dispute between two people and you decide reparations need to be made, that's tricky. But if you're looking at something that's over 100, however many years it is, it's even more tricky, and it brings up high emotions among Pakeha, which is what we call kind of the New Zealanders of European descent, and Maori. And it's like, how do you suddenly, land that belongs to people, and maybe they've got their houses on, how do you kind of, how can you give that back, and what do you do? How can you make good after all this time? And I think it's incredibly difficult, but there's no reason not to try. And I think that's what I really admire about what's happened over here, is that there has been an attempt to do that. And so sometimes that's been with money. So there are certain kind of projects, business projects, which are managed by as a very successful fishery that's been managed by Maori, and they've set that up through Waitangi money. Waitangi money, that's what rhymes. And of course the Pakeha often feel, well, this isn't fair, this all happened a long time ago. And also there's the other argument is that, well, you Maoris weren't the first people to come here. You did this to the people that were here before you, which is a bit of I think quite a sketchy kind of argument, really. I'm not sure really that carries any weight at all, really. I think that's kind of just something to say, but certainly I think what Pakeha feel is aggrieved, really, that money is going to Maori people and not to them. They feel that they are being cheated out of money, or an injustice is now being taken out. It's a little bit like I don't know. You get two brothers, and one of them is experienced some hardships, so the parents spoil the brother that's had the hardships, and the other brother's saying, well, hang on a minute, what about me? Why aren't I getting all these treats? I mean, again, it's oversimplification. I don't want to be disrespectful. I am biased towards Maori people in this, but I don't want to be disrespectful to Pakeha people that, in some cases possibly do have a point, in some of the detail, if not in the principle. And like I say, it's a very difficult thing. I think I don't have a lot of sympathy, though. A tiny bit of sympathy. I think the other argument is, that's commonly said, is that, well, if you give money to Maori, they'll waste it. They'll spend it all down the pub. And I've done some other videos on this kind of way of thinking and why people have this way of thinking. And this is quite a complex issue in itself, so I think I might just try and put a link to one of those other videos. And this is something that happens in a lot of cultures. This happens with Native Americans and lots of other places where dispossessed population. So basically, so in short, really, if you commit atrocities and injustices against a whole population, that population then becomes impoverished, it becomes dispossessed, and becomes prey to all kinds of social problems like alcoholism, poor parenting, and abusive parenting, and it sets up a whole chain really that takes, I think, several hundred years to actually be rectified. And that's if there's some active work being done to rectify it. So what happens is, often, there's a for example, the Maori population are overrepresented in jail. Now I think some of that possibly is due to discrimination, but a lot of it is to do with who goes to jail. So generally speaking, people in well-to-do families that have had a good education and have wanted for nothing and have grown up in nice neighbourhoods, fewer of those go to jail than people who are who've grown up with alcoholism, who've grown up with social problems, who've grown up with domestic violence and all those kinds of things. So and what colonisation does is it sets up a whole chain of poverty that goes on for generation after generation after generation. So there is some truth in the fact that some Maori people will not be as highly functioning as their Pakeha brethren, but it would make sense, wouldn't it, if one bunch of people has had all the property and the money and the rights and the good things in life, and the other have been left on the sidelines struggling. That's going to be what happens. So the argument, you can't give it to Maori, they won't know what to do with it. Well, first of all, that's been disproved because there've been some, brilliant projects where it's been very successful. But the reason why people think that way is, there is a reason, a kind of, people, to some degree, like I say, people who've been dispossessed are going to have a higher incidence of all kinds of kind of social dysfunction, and it's not their fault, they've inherited that, just as the Pakeha have inherited the good things and the goodies. So Waitangi continues. It's an ongoing process. So it's a national holiday. It's an amazing thing. It's a complex thing. It's a controversial thing, but it's very different, really, to what happened in a lot of other parts of the British Empire, where because ultimately, New Zealand and the Maori people did get colonised, but there was an attempt, at least, however genuine it was, to try and do things a little bit differently, which is really interesting. And we can still, that work continues to this day. So happy Waitangi Day. I've probably offended lots of people in the making of this. That's not what I'm setting out to do. So if you have a different opinion, by all means, tell me, share that. Just do it politely, because we need to talk to each other. People with different opinions need to be polite and respectful and talk about it. And on social media, people seem to have lost that ability, which I think is very sad. So you can disagree with me. You can say what you like. It's how you say it. Any disrespectful comments, and we'll probably just remove them. But disagreement, alternative views, if they're polite, then go for it. Let's hear different sides of it, because I'm new to this country. I'm new to this history. So I'm interested to hear all perspectives on it. So thank you for watching. I always end videos with the word rangi Markie. And some videos I kind of explain that, but generally speaking I don't. But just to say rangi Markie is te reo. Te reo just means language, a Maori word for peace. So thank you for watching. Rangi Markie.